Hi there, you're listening to A Founder's Life, where my guests and myself share their entrepreneurial journey and their methods for a balanced life. I'm joined here today by Jimmy Dean Freeman. Jimmy, thank you for joining us today. I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Hey, Leo, thanks for having me. My name is Jimmy Freeman, known in the community by many as Jimmy Dean Freeman. Came out of a misunderstanding many years ago, a nickname that stuck. I am a professional endurance running coach. I've been coaching distance runners for about 23 years, which is about the time that I moved to Southern California from Northern California. I'm married, got two amazing kids, almost 10-year-old girl and a 7-year-old wrecking ball disguised as a boy. I love running. I've competed very seriously for about 35 years. Started running 10K road races when I was 9 years old. And I ran my last semi-serious 100-mile desert race in October of 2018. And I've raced a few times since 2018, but most of my weekends are taken up with youth sports commitments, AYSO soccer and Little League baseball and all of the kid schlepping activities, 17 birthday parties per weekend. I love distance running because it's an everyday staple for me. It's a through line that's kept me healthy and partially sane. And I started doing it really early and have had done it on and off my whole life. And in the early 2000s, I got an opportunity to coach a marathon training group. And it was a charity-based fundraise and go on a trip type of marathon program. And my girlfriend joined the team, now my wife, and we went to Kona, Hawaii together, and it was really cool. And we both got into a series of running a lot of marathons, and I was coaching these teams over and over and over again. And after a few years of chasing after the Boston Marathon, ran Boston in April of 2005 and was looking for a bigger challenge and started racing 100-mile mountain races. And that got me into coaching ultra-distance trail and mountain runners. So I was coaching large-scale teams for marathons and further, and really focusing on the trails and how trail running can make you a faster road racer for those that were running road marathons. And that brings us, 20-something years to today, where I'm still coaching and I still am really passionate about what distance running is and how it affects every other area of our life.
You're a rarity in the fact that you are truly doing as your job what is your passion. I mean, I guess I met you about 10 years ago because your 10-year-old was in a pushchair at the time. I was introduced to you because I was looking at doing my first half marathon and wanted to actually make it. And I'll never forget what you said to me, which was, you should be able to run like the glass of water on your head. And I'm like, that's why you can run 100 miles. I'm definitely not running like there's a glass of water on my head. My running style ain't that good. I make it, but certainly not running 100 miles. But with a little bit of encouragement and guidance from you, I did do my first marathon a month ago, so that was fun.
Yeah, it's half marathons are a gateway drug.
Yeah, I think they are, and the nice thing about a half marathon is it's a distance almost anyone can do. If you're a taller runner, I think you can do it. You may come out of it saying, okay, been there, done that was enough, one. but I think anyone can do it, and it is, the recovery on it doesn't have to be too bad. It's not like a marathon where it does take time for most people to recover from a marathon.
Half marathons, they're a cool blend of speed and distance. And we joke that, you start a half marathon, you finish early in the morning, you can still go get breakfast. It doesn't take a dent out of your next day or your next week. Whereas marathons, you might be limping around for 4 or 5 days and you might not want to race again for a month or two. So,
but you also feel like you've done something. It's like when I've done a triathlon, I remember doing some sprints in the early days, and sprints just, you come out of it thinking it just wasn't very long. Whereas an Olympic triathlon, which is basically a 1.5 kilometre swim followed by a 40-kilometer bike ride, followed by a 10K run, it's enough time that you feel like you've done a good workout as well. I think a half marathon is similar. I mean, it is, it's a decent run. You're out there for, I don't know, if you're really good, maybe you're doing an hour and a half, maybe it's taking you 2.5 hours. But either way, it's a good, it's a good workout. And there's a feel of achievement.
Yeah. And, you did your marathon, and now here we are talking about other races in other cities, where else you can do marathons, and it's very it's motivating in a very addicting, hopefully health enhancing kind of way.
I think that's the trick, and one of the things I always liked when I first met you was you're a serious runner. I mean, I'd say one of the most serious runners I know, but you also don't have a runner's body. And I mean that in a good way, meaning a lot of traditional runners you meet, all they do is run and actually really doesn't look very healthy. They don't do cross training. I mean, you do a great job of, what's your routine look like in terms of your fitness routine?
Well, I did exactly what you're saying. I was only a runner for the first 29 years of distance running. So I was about 38 when I added some serious strength training and resistance training and weightlifting to my regimen. And the nickname that I had that was not very flattering was tree trunk legs and spaghetti string arms. And there's a really great comic satirist named The Oatmeal. And if you haven't seen it, there's this book called the Great Big Book of Running or something like that, and he does this whole bit on what runners think they look like and what runners actually look like. And it's like those kids' books where you can flip the pages and put different tops on different bottoms, and it's this skinny, like, ribs showing, flaily arms on top of, like, muscular legs and, like, a strong lower half. So I had a disproportionate body for most of my late teens to my late 30s. And over the last decade, I've gone more for head to toe health and focused more on strength and dynamic movements and ankle and hip mobility. Whatever your sport is, whatever your activity is that involves repetitive motion patterns, my saying is you're either going to expose an imbalance or you're going to create one. And runners, for the most part, distance runners have very much either created or helped supplement the physical therapy industry, because we've all run ourselves into various ailments that we've had to, deconstruct and start to work through. So as I got more into strength training, as I got more into some dynamic movements, lateral movement, distance runners aren't doing a lot of lateral movement, working on the balance between glute maximus and glute medius and correcting some of these long-standing imbalances that I had, trying to get my upper body, at least halfway to where my lower body was. I started to feel a lot better, a lot stronger. And my back, I've had back stuff on and off since I was about 33. So 5 years into my back stuff, I started doing, serious weight training, and that started to help it a lot when I started to balance out some of these muscle groups. So my general routine, I probably run anywhere between 3 and 6 times a week. I'm time-based as opposed to focusing on mileage. Twice a week, I do a relatively serious, almost hour-long weight session and, rotate, a little bit of everything in both sessions, but I more of an upper body focus early in the week, more of a lower body focus late in the week. And I'll go back and forth between going very heavy, low rep and a medium range weight for higher endurance. And I added other sports back into my routine. So I've been playing baseball and softball, and that's kind of gotten the body to move in different ways. And at first, after all the years and decades of running, I had years that I averaged more than an hour a day for the whole year, running 380 to 400 hours a year. As I scaled back on that and added other cross-training activities, my body started to feel a lot better.
I'm guessing your most intense period, although you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, was when you did 600-mile races in 3 months.
Yeah, that was the summer of 2014. I was a big advocate and proponent of 2 big races a season. And whether it be 2 marathons or 200-mile mountain races, I would have a long build-up from base fitness up to race fitness. And training so hard to do a fast marathon or a 100-mile mountain race or desert race, it seemed silly to have one day or one weekend in the whole year wrapped around that because it took so much time to get into that kind of shape. So I would generally put 2 races 8 to 12 weeks apart. And I had a 100-mile finish every year for, I think, 11 or 12 years. Maybe it was 10 or 11. But I had a buddy named Andy. And Andy, when I first met him, was running all 6 of the original 6 100-mile trail races. And they're all in the United States, East Coast, West Coast, Colorado, Utah. And the summer that I met him, I think, was 2007. And he finished 560 of the 600 miles of this challenge. And the highest altitude race of those was in Colorado. And he timed out due to altitude sickness. And so he didn't finish this complete challenge. And we were friends for many years. And Andy was like, as soon as I get into this race that you have to get into via lottery, I'm going to sign up for all 6 and attempt this challenge again. And over beers, one day I sort of quipped that if we got into this one race together, Western States, that I would sign up for all 6. And the chances of us getting into the race the same year, like we both had about a 7% chance of being drawn. And it's actually significantly harder than that now, but my math said that 7% of 7% was not a very big number. So it was a fraction of 1% chance of us getting into the race the same year. So I was just sort of like throwing him a bone. And of course, then karma slapped me in the face, and I got into the race, and then he got into the race. And I think some of my best experiences in life have been biting off more than I can chew and having a big mouth, but also being willing to dumb enough to follow it up. And this was the first weekend of June through Labor Day weekend in September, and it was a 100-mile trail or mountain race every 2 to 3 weeks for the entire summer. And it was a wild adventure, and Andy and I got really close over that summer and had a blast and got to see 2 races on the East Coast, Vermont and Virginia, and 2 California races, and then 1 in Colorado, 1 in Utah. And it was incredible seeing all these different mountain ranges and trail systems and different running communities in each one of these areas. It's the running, I say the running community is a tribe. It has some tribal dynamics. And there's a lot of sports and activities out there that have their own sort of tribal dynamics. And the ultra running community and the marathon running community are 2 distinct tribes. And it was a very fun summer. And it was right before my wife got pregnant that year, and right when I finished this challenge in early September, my daughter was born a few months later. So it was a cool transition into parenthood.
Well, I was lucky it was that year, because you wouldn't have been doing it the following year.
Definitely not. And my wife is a very serious competitive distance runner. The year before that, she placed top 10 at the LA Marathon, and she broke her leg in, I say September or October of 2013. And so as we wrapped into 2014 and I got into this race challenge, it was clear that she wasn't going to be able to run a race that year. And so it was like an unfortunate event that led to the right environment of timing where I could spend the summer being really selfish. And I knew it was going to be it, that there was a transition into the next season of life that wouldn't allow for that same time availability or committing that amount of resources to something. So it was cool timing, and I was very present in the moment of, this is my one shot to kind of do this. And so I really leaned into it and suffered a lot and enjoyed a lot of the beautiful moments, knowing that that was going to kind of not be repeatable.
And didn't your wife have pretty rapid change from her first marathon to her second marathon in terms of timing and speed?
Yeah, going all the way back to 2002, when I coached my first marathon team. She finished the Kona Marathon in June of 2002, her first ever marathon, in 4 hours and 59 minutes. And you fast forward to 2013, so over a decade of training, she went from a 4:59 to a 2:58 marathon. She was cutting off 10 to 20 minutes pretty consistently every 3 to 4 months. And then there was some hiatus there in between, sort of how frequently she was racing, but it felt like she PR'd every time she raced. And it wasn't literally like that, but she was very serious about her training. And, it started off, she was an hour and 20 plus minutes away from a Boston qualifying time. And from 2002 to 2005, she dropped her time an hour and 20 something minutes to get to Boston. So she ran Boston 2006, I think. And that was pretty awesome to be there at Boston with her and to remember, the 5 hour-ish marathoner suddenly be among all these elite athletes. And that was a blip on the radar. She was a 3:39 marathoner and she still cut off another 41 minutes.
Wow. What's your fastest marathon?
2:56. I ran 2:56 the first time I ran the LA Marathon in 2011. And I ran LA 3 years in a row, and I got 1 minute or 2 minutes slower each year. It got harder and harder as you try to reclaim sort of those mile-by-mile splits. So yeah, having big goals, it gets, you have to kind of work twice as hard for half as much improvement. And running, when you get to the peak of your performance and ability, you're trying to shave seconds. And, even a second or two per mile is quite a grind to find.
How long does a 100-miler take you?
Whew. I mean, the thing that I love about 100-milers is you don't think about PR times and mile-by-mile splits in the same way that you do in road racing, because the elevation profile and the weather conditions are so significantly different that you have to really readjust the way that you think about each race. Some races are at altitude, some races are flat, desert, some races are, 90 to 100 plus degrees, some races are freezing, some races are both 108 degrees and then 28 degrees. So to answer the question, in 2010, I ran a race in Texas in 17 and a half hours, 17:36 or something like that. Ended up being like 10 minutes and 30 seconds a mile. And then I've had 100-mile races take more than 30 hours and, significantly more challenging conditions. And so the longest I ever ran was 135 miles. And one of the races that I did took me 38 and a half hours. So from the 100-mile genre, my range of 17 and a half hours to 38 and a half hours is pretty wild.
38 hours was for what distance was that one?
135.
135, so you're 200 kilometers, give or take.
Yeah, 217.
And are you stopping for... What's the longest stop you do for in 38 hours?
Yeah, I mean, you think of these marathon, 100-mile, events. I think of them as like a through hike with big checkpoint like sort of stations where you're getting some food and some fluids and some rest. And part of the strategy is how much or how little time you take to recoup in between checkpoints. And the idea is, if you have 100 to 500 people competing in these events, while you're sitting down resting, the people ahead of you are getting further away and the people behind you are catching up. So it's an event where if you can go straight through without rest, you do. I didn't have any 135-mile races where I didn't take some strategic rest and sleep. But in the first 135, a race called Badwater through Death Valley, I would take 10 to 15 minute nap breaks. And I think I took 2 or 3 of those. And then I had one time that I just knocked out for like an hour. Whereas in a 100-mile race, I had races that I ran straight through without really stopping at all, more than 2 to 5 minutes just to refill water bottles and get food. So you don't rest or sleep if you don't have to, but sometimes it becomes a strategical maneuver where you're like, I need to sleep right now. I've even had it where I've laid down on the side of the trail and had the person with me shock me awake in like 7 or 8 minutes to try to reset the brain from trying to put you to sleep.
So what are they doing? They're having to stand there watching you?
Well, in the 100-mile genre, there is a support position on your team called pacer. And after about the halfway point of most of these races, somebody is allowed to jump into the race and help you navigate. And the joke is they're the clear-headed brain, whereas you're so fatigued and tired that you are likely to turn the wrong direction on a trail or lay in a bush and no one knows where you are. So you have someone there that to guide and give you some companionship. And they're not a required part of the race, but I've always found it really enjoyable to have someone to sort of distract me from the immediate suffering. And so that their role is a support role, and I've also been that pacer for many other people. And it's really an enjoyable way to participate in these races. I actually like pacing and crewing people better than I like racing myself at this stage. But they're there to sort of keep you on track, and you're telling them what your goal is, and sometimes your goal gets revised as you slow down or run into more trouble than you anticipated. But yeah, I've had people where I'm like, hey, wake me up in 7 minutes and like scare me awake. And it's amazing the things that you can do to trick your own physiology and psychology into forward movement.
And are they switching in and out? Like, is it generally the same person doing the next 50 miles with you, or are there a few people who take it in turns?
Different races have different availability. So there are races where you're not going to see people on your support team very often. Wasatch in Utah is one of them. You see your people 3 times over 100 miles. So when somebody jumps in with you, there's not a lot of opportunities for them to swap out. Whereas a race in Southern California called Angeles Crest, I would have 3 different people do different segments of the race with me. I've done races with no support, and I just find that I enjoy them a lot less. It's sort of like an opportunity to connect with the people in your life and have an experience that you're not going to have in just sort of everyday settings.
So if you're not running, what do you like to do for fun?
I am a super nerd dad. My wife is my best friend, and I've got, my daughter is almost 10 and my son is 7, and they're both super sporty. We love to go for trail runs together. We just took the kids to a obstacle course mud race a few weekends ago and had an absolute blast. We're leaning into a lot of our favorite activities that the kids are being exposed to for the first time. So we went to an amazing concert at the Hollywood Bowl a few weekends ago. We took them to an NFL football game 2 weekends ago. We liked a road trip for some, adventure. We almost always end up on a trail in a mountain somewhere, hiking and running. And we have a new family member, a 1-year-old dog that also loves to get on the trails with us. I play baseball and softball with the guys, with my brother. I'm on one of his teams. Aside from those activities, they're almost all family-based at this point. I'm coaching youth sports. I coach Little League Baseball almost year-round. And in the phase of parenting that we're in, it's 90% family activity and 10% self-care. And my self-care, my favorite time of the day is 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. I like being up before the sun, and I like getting out because it's the only time that isn't demanded by other people. But once the clock hits 7 a.m., it's, commitment to the family, and then you get the kids to school, and then it's commitment to my clients. And when the afternoon is over, then you're schlepping the kids to orchestra or martial arts or anything like that. But it's a lot of family time. Obviously, you're a parent, you know how challenging those developing personalities can be. And we've got two feral, high-octane kids, and sometimes they're best friends and sometimes they're arch nemesis. And so managing that, sometimes I'm prepared, sometimes I'm a referee. We're enjoying the phase that they're in, but it's a very challenging time from a time management standpoint and from a orchestrating of these little sociopaths, if you will.
They're obviously still relatively young, but are they? So, how much do they enjoy running?
They love it. I've tried to be very cognizant of not pushing my favorite activities on them, because running in particular can be a lifelong discipline, and it's one that's really given me such a tremendous amount of autonomy and self-confidence, and obviously, more health benefits than injuries, but a little of both. So I've always tried to introduce them to running in a way that was not pushing them in any way and allowing them to sort of guide us in terms of their level of interest. And we gave them a very early appreciation for the trails and nature. And we were running a lot of local races with them in the stroller. So, they were in the race environment before they could run. And they saw those activities and they saw how much fun we were having. And now the kids both run 5Ks and 10. My daughter's done 3 10Ks. She's 9. And my son just did his second 5K, and he's already running 24 minutes and change, which is kind of insane. They're both a lot faster than I was when I was their age. And they love it. My son's a bit of a lunatic from the competitive side. My daughter has a lot of endurance and a lot of grit. And I think, if I'm projecting out, my son has a lot of top-end speed. He could be a 400-meter or 800-meter runner. But we'll see. They'll tell us what they're into. But they love running. We take them out, and, when we're in the non-team sports season, which is now heading into December, January, February, we'll do more runs together as a family. And when we're in the midst of sports season, most days are scheduled. So the family trail run or the family run together is a little bit less frequent.
So if you're, I did my marathon about a month ago now, and I guess the wall looks differently for different people. For me, I discovered it at 18.7 miles. I was on fire, which you'll probably say was my problem, but I was on fire for the first 18.7 miles. I wanted to be sub 4. Happy to say I did just about finish sub 4 by 10 seconds, although there's some pictures of me in excruciating pain the last couple of miles, but I made it. But at 18.7 miles, I was on track to do probably a 1:35, which I would argue probably meant a 1:30, because I could have hopefully got a little more speed at the end. And then suddenly my legs said to me, "What the hell are you doing?" And I made the next 6 odd miles, but yeah, it was a little more painful. Very painful. I love what you have to say about the wall, your definition about sort of that side of a race. And I'm assuming that happens in principle in any race. I assume that can happen in a 100-mile race, or even in a 10K for someone who's not used to it.
Each race distance has its own set of challenges. And there's a lot of magic and mystery in the marathon distance in particular. And it has such a unique set of challenges. The wall in the marathon, from a physiological standpoint, is the body going into a modified state of ketosis, where it's running out of glycogen. It doesn't have enough fuel to continue at effort. So it starts to metabolize muscle proteins. And you're already dealing with a tremendous amount of fatigue, and the body starts to eat itself. And that is a very uncomfortable proposition. Not to mention, whenever we feel very angry or frustrated in the middle of the day, sometimes that's blood sugar related and we're not getting enough glycogen to our brain. So when you're dealing with that sort of negativity and you're in physical pain and your body starts to metabolize muscle protein, It's a seminal experience. The marathon I found, I've coached over, 1,800 marathoners, and most of which were first time beginning marathoners, couch to marathon. And some of them were, multi-time marathoners seeking their personal best or a qualifying standard for Boston. The marathon is really special because it really takes something to overcome the wall and to kind of stay locked in and be willing to suffer, be willing to go into this dark place. And when we're experiencing that level of physical challenge, we also have to deal with the psychological aspects of it. And, it's a race that forces you to face your demons. And I find that anything short of that distance, you're not going through that level of doubt, negative thoughts. It's a very cathartic, transformative distance. And, it's something where it's so challenging and painful in the race day experience, and it takes so much time and preparation and energy to get to the level of fitness to complete it, that it's a brick wall for most people. You have to really want that finish line to sustain the training program and then to sustain the physical and psychological pain of the actual effort. And, Dr. Randy Pausch has this seminar that he did called The Last Lecture, and it was a Carnegie Mellon lecture series. And his lecture became a book, and he was on Oprah, and it was a really amazing. There's a 18-minute version of this, or maybe it was an 8-minute version, I don't know. And then there's a full hour-long lecture about it, and it's one that I've always back referenced to. And he talks about the wall. He talks about the brick wall in life, and that the brick wall is there to keep other people out, and it's there to define how badly you want something. And much in the way that our society is very real time. You can order any food from any restaurant in any moment, and it shows up in your door in 45 minutes. We can turn on the TV and stream any movie or television show that's ever existed in immediate time. There's a lot of immediate gratification. So having things in our life that require endurance of lifestyle and overcoming struggle, that's just, there are things that are falling out of fashion. And the marathon is a throwback to that sort of pioneer spirit and mentality of really having to grind through some unknown, uncharted territory for yourself. And I find that there isn't a person that I've ever met that has been the same person at the finish line of their first marathon that they were at the starting line of their first marathon. And I used to say it was a surgical event, that you're surgically removing the word can't from your vocabulary. And people who finish the marathon stop saying I can't do it, and they start saying I want to do this and I don't want to do that. And it's a really cool mindset transformation, and one that I've never kind of gotten over the magic and mystery of. I still love the marathon. I hate it at the same time. The 100-miler, you don't go through the wall in the same way that you do in the marathon. It's a very distinct, unique event. In fact, I think the 3 hardest races, and I've probably raced 35 different distances, maybe more than that. The 3 hardest events are the 1-mile race, or the 1,500 meter, the marathon, and the 100-mile mountain genre. They have such unique sets of challenges. And, you would think that okay, maybe the longest ones are the hardest, or the ones where you have to go the fastest are the hardest, but each race has its own set of challenges and variables that make each race sort of interesting and dynamic.
It makes sense. And I guess, the difference is on some of these shorter ones, you're having to do the speed. Longer ones, endurance is a lot of the challenge. If you look at a marathon and, the 26.2 miles, which was 26.5 when I did it. So that I was really swearing that last half a mile, because I kept turning a corner thinking, where is the end of this? I'm like barely crawling to get over this thing, and it just never ends. And it's not even like it's straight, so you couldn't see the end. You had to keep turning corners. So it's like they hid the end. I thought it was funny when I read it. You probably know this story, but why the marathon is 26.2 miles.
26 miles, 385 yards. It happened at the second modern-day Olympiad in London. The Queen of England wanted to see the race, and the Olympic Stadium was further away from the palace than the traditional about 25-mile race. And the distance was originally the distance from the town of Marathon in Greece to Athens. And, the original marathon runner, Phidippides, was a messenger runner. And he ran about 25 miles from the battlefield at Marathon to Athens. And so they did this demonstration event in the first modern-day Olympiad in Greece. And the race had a lot of drama and a lot of excitement, so they decided to install it as an event at the second Olympiad. And the Queen wanted to see it. So the saying in marathon running is when you cross the 25-mile mark and you have that additional 1 mile, 385 yards, that you say, "God save the Queen." And there's a gesture that I won't do here that is basically saying, like, the Queen's number one. And you kind of kiss your finger and point it up at the sky, say, "God save the Queen," and then you run that last miserable 1.22 miles.
So it's another thing that's the Brits' fault.
Yes, definitely. And for whatever reason, when they continued the race after that race, that became the standardized distance. They didn't revert to the 25-ish miles. I blame New York and Boston. Those running clubs in the United States were the first to popularize a publicly held marathon after the second Olympiad. And so they looked up the course in London, and they made their New York City Marathon and Boston Marathon 26 miles, 385 yards. And those became the distances moving forward. And here we are today, still doing that. And every race distance that's on a road, you will find to be a smidge long by current GPS standards. We just did a 5K, which is supposed to be 3.11 miles, and it was 3.27. And as you saw, your marathon wasn't 26.22, and that's because the courses are measured from turn to turn, just running the most direct route. Yet when you have a bunch of people in a race, they're running the vehicular lane lines like they're a car. They're staying in their lane, as opposed to running if you're running on a track, you can be on that inside lane and you know you're doing the proper distance. Whereas if a car is turning left and right, you're not running that straight line in between the apex of the turn. So you're always going to get a little bit longer than the actual race distance. I'm
assuming the guys who are at the front, where there is no one around them, are pretty much running that shortest distance. Yes,
the leaders, when the traffic of the foot traffic is not as thick, they also have a vehicle or a bike that will be pace setting, and will be showing them the direction of the course, and they're generally riding or driving straight. But I imagine there are races where even the elites are running just a smidge longer, but for the most part, they're following the apex of the turns because there's no one around them.
So what's been a pivotal moment in your life?
Well, I mean, I look back at different phases and seasons of my life, and I have a running memory that was, an important transitional or developmental moment. It starts with the first race that I ever ran when I was 9. My dad was a serious tennis player and a once a year weekend warrior 10K runner with his buddies. And when I was 9, he said, "Hey, do you want to train for this race?" And I was like, I had no idea what 10K meant. So I trained with him, and he said, "Oh, you have to come out and run with me 3 days a week, and we're going to do it for a month and a half." And we got to the race on race day, and there was, a 10K and a 5K, and I'm sure there was a kids run. And he said, "Which one do you want to do?" And I didn't know. I said, "Well, which one are you doing?" And he said, "I'm doing the 10K. So I'm like, "Okay, I'll do that," not knowing any better. And that, I think, was one of the first things in my life where you had to plan and you had to sort of set a goal to like be consistent and do something over and over and over again. So it really felt for me like one of the first things that I had to work for outside of like school or academics or whatnot. And it was such a satisfying feeling crossing the finish line that I went and repeated that almost every year with my dad until I was in high school, and then joined the cross-country team. And then there was this amazing transition of discovering cross-country distance running, which was being in nature and in parks and mountains. And, you know, the races were at golf courses or parks where you're going up and down hills. And I found that to be really satisfying. And, you know, I've always loved the analogy of hill or mountain running, when you have to really grind up a grade and fight gravity and suffer a little harder with that, like, working uphill. And then you get to the top of something and it's not as hard as it was, and you have this incredible view. And it sort of gives you a purpose to the suffering. So I have come to love the grind of running uphill. And that became a sort of directly applicable principle to my life, that starting something or building something is really hard. And when you're pushing that, you know, rock up the hill, that when you get it to the top, there's an incredible feeling of satisfaction and a much better view. And, you know, life itself is like the elevation profile of a mountain. There's many false summits. There's times when you get up to the top of something and you have to go back downhill just to climb up again. And, you know, moving forward into my early 20s, when I decided I wanted to run my first marathon, you know, I didn't get into it with just this idea of finishing 26.2 miles. I immediately wanted to qualify for the Boston Marathon and run faster than 3 hours. And, you know, you go into most goals in life a little bit naive, thinking that that you'll achieve them sooner than you will. And when things are really hard, you know, the type of goal that I found to be really invigorating in my life are things that take 5 to 10 years to achieve. And it changes your mindset and who you are at the beginning of a big goal in life. 5 years down the road, you're unrecognizable to yourself. And you have to go through a lot of stages of shedding your outer skin and transformation to kind of get to that new version of yourself. And as I chased after the Boston Marathon, I found that to be true. And when I ran Boston and decided to get into the 100-mile mountain genre, it was the same challenge. It, you know, took me another 5 or 10 years to get to the Western States 100. And then it was like, I didn't just want to run Western States. I wanted to crack the 24-hour mark. And that took another multiple tries of going to that race and breaking myself up and learning more about myself. And so, yeah, I find that, you know, that there's a lot of touch points in my life that are non-running related, but running having been the through line for me, there's always a running moment to harken back to where I saw a change in trajectory and a change in perspective.
What's a balanced life look like for you? And when I talk about a balanced life, you know, life, you talked about it earlier, there's the ebbs and flows. And the same as balance, we're never always in balance. There's going to be times we're one way or another. But overall, what does a balanced life look like for you?
I look at life in kind of 4 different buckets, if you will. And not everybody has 4 buckets. Family, having kids, is a very distinct bucket that not everyone decides to pick up. But I look at health in the realm of, you know, what we eat and how we sleep and how we exercise and challenge the body. Health is a bucket for me. And relationship, you know, my relationship with my wife and my closest friends, or as we call them, chosen family. You know, you have your actual blood family and you have the people that you choose into your inner circle as your chosen family. And those are people that challenge you and inspire you. So health, relationships. I put competition in its own category, even though there's a Venn diagram. You know, the competition circle and the health circle overlap. and the relationship circle and the competition circle overlap. And then family being its own bucket, being a parent. So all of those circles intersect. And it's balance for me is finding a time where you can give yourself to the people in your life that are important. You can take time for yourself to become the best version of yourself that you can be. So you bring that best version of yourself back to your people. And, career, I guess 5 buckets. Career, health, relationships, competition, family. The other thing that I think about is we have this idea that we want to evolve. We want to push the needle forward in any given area. And you can't push the needle forward in multiple, you can't go all 5 areas moving up at the same time. So in order to have something sort of get to the next level, you have to give it a lot of time and energy and attention. And you can kind of only do that in one and a half areas at a time. So if someone is seeking, a life partnership and they're not dating anybody, you got to put a lot of energy into meeting people and getting to know them and seeing, what works. And if you have your career in a great place and you're making money and you're doing something you love and, you have your relationship nailed down, having children is a really rigorous dedication of time and energy, especially in the early years of both creating those kids and then raising them as toddlers. And then maybe your health is something that you've let fall, and that's the area that you want to transform and you want to, get into a better habit and a routine. So when things are clicking along, I have time dedicated in every week to every one of those areas. And I think to myself, what's the area that I need to push forward the most right now? And that area has to get a little bit more time and energy. So different times of life, you kind of push one area forward a little harder than others. And, recently I looked back into the competition realm. I signed up for a 62-mile race, and I haven't done anything that long in 6 years. 2 summers ago, I got back into baseball. And that took a lot of rigor to get back into sort of some physical movement patterns that I hadn't been in for a while. When I got back into coaching distance runners, that took a lot of rigor, especially post 2020, 2021. I wasn't able to coach because there were no events. There were no races to do for a year and a half with the pandemic. So there was a lot of rigor put back into my coaching business, in 2021 to kind of get that back on its feet. So balance for me is kind of thinking holistically about the week and how much time and energy that you have, and finding time for each one of those things, if not every day, over the week or the month. Where do you have those spots to dedicate time and energy to each one of those areas?
And so where's the 100K?
It's in Arizona. It's in February. It's Super Bowl weekend. And it's a part of the Sonoran Desert that I have not run in before. I've run quite a few races in the Sonoran Desert, and I find it to be one of the most incredibly beautiful desertscapes. And it's a very, very popular race, a very competitive race. I'm not looking to compete. I'm looking to just do the distance and enjoy myself. And obviously there'll be some moments of not enjoying myself so much. I expect it to be a 12 to 14 hour event where I've done some 100K races in single digit hours, 9 hours and change. So I'm expecting this to be quite a bit slower than that. And I've been doing 25, 30 miles a week for health purposes for quite some time. And I've thrown in like a 5K or 10K over the last couple of years, but this is a significant push-up. I did a 50-miler 2 years ago, and it was awful. And so I didn't sign up for anything long again for 2 years. And it'll be like 26 months in between ultra-distance races. And I haven't finished anything longer than 50 miles since October of 2018. So it will be it'll be a big challenge to kind of get the the mileage and the time back up to that.
The good news is you've got nothing to prove. You've done it. You've shown you can do it. I mean, that doesn't mean you won't want to prove something to yourself and therefore get annoyed at yourself. But you've done the races, and you've done the races in great times.
Sometimes nothing to prove is also a detriment, because that sort of restlessness, that desire to like prove something to yourself or to someone else, galvanizes your focus. And what's funny is, from a personal standpoint, I don't feel that at all. However, in 2018, my kids were 3.5 and 1. And I got back into it sort of in 2021, just as a way to get back in shape after the pandemic. And I ran a 100-kilometer race and failed to finish. And then I ran a 100-mile race and failed to finish. And my son at the time, I think he was probably 4.5 years old, as I was talking to Kate, my wife, about the next races at the dinner table, my 4.5-year-old says, "Oh, that's okay, Daddy. You don't finish those anyway." So my desire to complete what I finish, finish what I start, so to speak, is motivated by the fact that my kids have no idea what I've done in this realm. And they know it like anecdotally, like about stories people have told, but they haven't seen it. And I want them to know a dad that does really hard things and completes what I, start. And so there's that sort of incentive that's sort of galvanized my focus a little bit about the way in which I approach it, the way I prepare, so that my kids know me. I have a goal, I'm 48 and closing in on 50, and I want to get back to the Badwater 135-mile race through Death Valley. And I want them to see and experience that and know, that that's hard things are possible, that things that people deem impossible are possible, and to go after things, with passion and rigor. And so this is the first stepping stone to get back into 100-mile shape, to get back to Death Valley.
Nice. The good thing about being 51 and the fittest I've ever been in my life, because I wasn't doing what you were doing when I was younger, or any kind of racing, is actually, I can always beat my own records because, to be honest, I've got fitter. But my records were nothing too impressive when I was younger, so it's okay. And how can people find you?
On the socials, it's at Coach Jimmy Dean. I'm most active on Instagram. Website, coyoterunning.com. You can just email me directly at coachjimmydean@gmail.com. I'm out and about at local races or baseball and softball games or Little League and AYSO in Brentwood and Santa Monica, California. But for the most part, at Coach Jimmy Dean and coyoterunning.com.
Well, thank you. And for anyone who does want sort of some help on training, whether it be your local or remote, Jimmy has made a fundamental difference to me as I got sort of my longer distances. So I highly recommend getting some help from you.
Yeah, I love the in-person stuff, but I've coached people as far away as Ireland. The remote stuff is great as well.
And it works. I mean, if I look at, for my marathon, for example, we did nothing in person. You helped put a plan together. We had a couple of calls, and that made a massive difference to me. And yes, I could have done a plan on ChatGPT or whatever, but actually it just wouldn't have been nearly as accurate, nearly knowing me, or having the personal help that you were able to provide. So I think it just makes complete sense to get that help as you move towards, someone moves towards distances, whether it be half marathons or marathons. And I just want to say thank you for coming today. Thank you everyone for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, tell your friends, please rate, leave a review.